GM, so Monday's range has been set on Bitcoin. Let's take a look at what we can expect for the trading week ahead. So this green box over here is the high to low of Monday's range. That now sets up our trading parameters for today and potentially the coming days too. So if we break below Monday's range, that can lead to more than likely an expansion move down into some of these gaps. And if we break above Monday's range, that can lead to an expansion move up. Very simple. While you're within the range, expect chop, although being below the weekly open now does put the low time frame control in the bears' hands. We're starting to accept below that level pre-New York session here, so interesting to see. Do the bears now follow through and break below Monday's range, or do we reclaim that weekly open and continue consolidating? Because that's the very key level here. And then above the weekly open, you of course have the daily open for today, which we started with a push up, swept out Monday's high with a false breakout, so bearish candle over here. That then led to this overnight selling where we lost the daily open, produced the momentum on the bears side, and is why we've seen this down move. So bulls really need to fight to hold this consolidation, get above the weekly open. Otherwise, it looks like we're going to see this chart actually break down. So if we do break down on this Bitcoin range here, well, what can we expect? Well, first of all, you have a CME gap over here. That gap ends at 104.1k, so roughly up towards this order block over here. That can be an initial target, but there are some other targets which I'm interested in and potentially looking to take some trade setups around. So let me show you those now. So Bitcoin, back to this chart over here, looking at the ranges. So the post-liquidation range, we had a daily close above the 0.75. So that is our early sign of a reversal forming. Now, could this need to come back for a retest of the lows and form a proper bottom? Very much so. That's a scenario that's on the cards. And because of that scenario is why I actually took 50% profits here at 105.3k. So mentioned to all of you guys in the Discord, 105.3k. Took half of my trade off the table for plus 0.65R. So that gives me some profits to play around with now, in which I'm setting a limit order to compound this long, moving the stop up to 101.085, which allows me to only risk those profits, so 0.65R on the entire compounded position when this fills. So I'm now risk-free. If that new stop gets hit, I lose this morning's TP. Very simple, but if it wins, then I've took profits and re-added to my position from lower to get a nice compounded trade if we do see a bounce here, because the areas that I'm looking for a bounce are at these gaps. So let's take a look at the order flow over here. Well, what happened? Well, we pushed up right to my key range low level over here, 107.2k. That swept the highs right off the daily open, and then we lost the daily open, which is key, which is why bears have been in control. So this gap, we tried to break above it and hold. We are now losing it. So when you lose this gap, we now look towards the next gap. And this was an impulse gap set on Sunday. So that's why I'm looking to compound my long here, because if there is demand and bulls do have strength here, any wick into this gap should find demand and build a base for another move higher. And that would then just set another higher low in this internal uptrend that we've had going on here. Now, alternatively, if we just trade through the gap, backtest it as resistance, maybe we do have to go back to the lows for a proper higher time frame bottom. That's definitely on the table too. And if so, I would be out risk-free from that trade. Stop would get hit, but this is how I'm playing it. Aiming for this gap to get defended. And if so, that gets me in compounded on my Bitcoin long, which is already long from around over here on Saturday after we reclaim that 50-week EMA. That was the setup I gave you guys. Make sure to keep up with all my videos, guys, if you don't want to miss out on these trades. And if you do value the content, please hit subscribe, turn that bell on so you don't miss a video, don't miss a setup, drop a like, drop a comment, help me boost the algorithm. A bunch of you aren't subscribed to my channel, and it really helps out the more of you that do subscribe to get this content out to more traders so that I can teach you all the right way of trading. So make sure you get that done. Let's dive back into the video. If we bounce from there, that's all good. But there's also some scenarios where I would also want to look for a short, and that's going to be from higher, guys. So let me show you the short setups, which I'm potentially eyeing up as well. So this was the short setup that I'm looking at. So it would be half risk on both of these to get an average entry somewhere in the middle for 1R risk in total. And I'd be looking to set a limit order at these two places for either a short, which just wicks into the bottom of this gap and rejects, or fills in the gap and rejects. Either way, I'd be in with either half risk or full risk if both hit. Unfortunately, on the wick up that we got this morning, it didn't quite fill. We front ran that level, so it doesn't look like this is going to hit anytime soon. But if we can get a push up later on, this is the setup I'll be looking at on the short side, just for a quick mean reversion play after filling the gap. And the logic behind it is simple. You've got this 50-day EMA, which is going to be coming down, and I think that can act as resistance for a setup just like this, where you wick into it, blast down, or you wick into it, blast down. Now, alternatively, sometimes you do close above it and actually form a proper trap, which gets balls long in here before you then eventually lose it. And if so, these would potentially get stopped out and I'd have to consider re-entering, but that's the setup. I'm aiming for a quick wick towards this 50-day EMA and this gap for a short back down mean reversion play. And a potential long if we do fill in the gap, hold the value area low, reclaim it and show signs of acceptance, but more of that in the weekly outlook video. I'll pin that in the comments. But shorts, those limit orders are going to be set for a potential play over here. So keep you guys posted on that one. Now, the reason I'm looking at the 50-day EMA is as follows. So Bitcoin really has some rejection points over here. You've got the 12 and 21 EMA bands, my coach's EMAs, which we're currently rejecting from here. So potentially we do get the red path and we just continue lower. Potentially, and what I'm betting on happening is we get a move up to this 50-day EMA instead. So we actually see a move up in this purple path. Or if we are going to be bullish, then what you're going to see is we're just going to flip the 50-day EMA, back test it as support more likely before moving higher. You will notice that in all of these big consolidation periods, something like the 50-day EMA is quite useful because you go below it, you go above it, you go below it, you go above it, you go below it, you go above it. But overall, when it starts to flatten out in areas like this, so you can see it's been going down, 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 but then it starts to go sideways. That's when you can start to actually respect it as a base. And that's when you then have the high highs, higher lows building off from it. So at the moment, is the 50-day EMA being respected? Let's have a look. Well, it's being respected as resistance currently. You haven't got this below, above, below, above. You're currently using it for sellers to show up in the downtrend. So that's why I have the purple path. And if you do want to see something like the orange path, the green path, sorry, you need to just get above it cleanly and be able to flip that band sideways and start building those higher highs and higher lows internally. And that can maybe set up for a move higher. But until then, this is, of course, distribution. We have back tested this 107.2K so far. This is still a bearish chart. Biases for lower unless we can see sellers get exhausted. And that is simply how downtrends end, guys. So while, yes, the chart is bearish, we are downtrending. This is when you want to look to say, if we do get a sell-off from here, well, are they able to push it to new lows, or do we just then start basing out a little bit more? like this red path over here. That's your two scenarios, and that shows you whether sellers are exhausted or whether they're actually in control. It's based on price. It's always price first. So does price follow or does price diverge? Simple. And that's the same for all of these paths. If we touch the 50-day EMA, reject, do we make a new low or do we actually just reaccumulate? That's what you have to just look at, and it's a wait and see game to see if sellers are exhausted, because it is still a downtrend. We are still going down. You have to see something like this where you see the sweep. You then see the sweep again. So wrecking longs, wrecking longs, wrecking longs. But in totality, this was a bottoming formation, even though price is going lower and lower, because it tried to go lower, failed, swept and reclaimed. Tried to go lower, failed, swept and reclaimed. And then eventually you reclaim the 50-day EMA as well, instead of rejecting it over here, like we did time and time again. And that's your bullish trigger to look for an uptrend. And you can look for something like those 12 and 21 EMA bands. They flip green here. Told you to look for longs. We're actually flipping from downtrend to uptrend. There were many signals. And right now, do we have those signals? No. Bands are still red. We're still using the 50-day EMA as resistance. So a lot of work to do. You need to see sellers fail to push price lower. That's your biggest sign of we are potentially forming a bottom here, because that just shows exhaustion, and it just takes patience, guys. Everyone wants to buy the bottom and people obsess over buying the bottom, but isn't it better to buy once you have confirmation, like the bands flipping green and like getting above the 50-day EMA or even the first retest? Isn't it better to do that than try get long here, get wrecked, try get long here, get wrecked? And then by the time you've been wrecked 1, 2, 3 times, even if you catch this long and win, you're just going to be ending up break even. So patience is everything as a trader. That's an example of why you need to wait for some sort of bottoming formation. And it was the same over here. What is this? Price was downtrending, much like we have now. Sure, you form a low time frame bottom and you bounce up. So we can have nice rallies here and still be bearish. And then you set your proper low, and then you fail to go lower. And you set those internal high highs and higher lows, and you start recovering and basing out. You start going sideways instead of going down. So very simple with what you want to see here. It's just patience makes it not so simple for traders. So that's what I'd be looking at on Bitcoin. Can we see something like this? Because again, in theory, you can rally to where we have now and reject. You can rally to the 50-day EMA around 110 and reject. You could even, technically speaking, see a rally all the way up back to 120, and that could all just be part of the distribution over here. So there's tons of opportunity. You've got to wait for confirmations, because there's so many different ways this can play out that it's a trader's market, and you've got to have systems in order to trade it, and you simply just take your system rules. That's how you win in this market right now. So that's Bitcoin. If we take a look at Ethereum, let's see what's going on in ETH land. Well, ETH also has Monday's range set here, so it's outperforming Bitcoin. You can visually see this. Bitcoin's at the low of Monday's range, whereas ETH is actually at the middle of Monday's range. So nice to see. I've been mentioning a lot in the Discord that I expect ETH outperformance outside of New York hours. It's simple because ETFs focus on Bitcoin during New York hours. So outside of ETF hours, the focus can go to ETH. And you're seeing that strength now show up. It's holding Monday's range. And the biggest signal that I actually like on ETH here is the fact that it's not swept its Monday's high. It left its Monday's high, unlike Bitcoin, which leaves the liquidity, lets it build up, lets short stops build up, which builds energy for a move higher if that can come. So holding Monday's range, pretty nice to see. Relative strength over Bitcoin, low time frame here. So now it's much the same. You're forming more of a compression pattern even here on ETH, as opposed to Bitcoin, which is teasing with breaking down here. So how does this resolve? Do we keep compression and then eventually form some sort of breakout above Monday's range? If so, that's going to be bullish. The break of Monday's range sets up your signal for expansion higher. Or do we potentially break down from this range If so, then you're looking at some of these gaps again to potentially hold. If not, a retest of that yearly open to see if that can hold instead. So that's what I'll be looking at on Ethereum. So gaps wise, what do you have? You've got gap above here, and you've got a gap below over here. So on the breakdown, I'd be watching these two gaps to see what actually fills and what gets respected or disrespected. So breakdown, I'll be looking for this gap to hold. Lose that, then the yearly open. Break out, then I'd be looking at this gap as a target for initial rejections or rejections after trading through it. So that's really the targets on Ethereum that I'd be looking for. If you are in any longs and on the downside, that's what I'd be looking at on dips, one of these levels or zones to hold. So that will show how strong ETH is depending on which ones hold or not. And ETH's pretty simple, high time frame. Just like Bitcoin rejecting from these daily 12 and 21 bands so far, this gap over here as well, daily gap. Does that flush us to the yearly open is the question, into this demand zone which we've seen over here, or can we actually find some demand, push up towards the upper band? If so, then I'd expect us to move towards this 50-day EMA, where we then reject maybe, or flip that, and you got the high time frame SR. And really, you need to get above the high time frame SR if we're going to see extended upside on Ethereum, because you've got these big distribution boxes over here that need to get traded through if we are going to see bulls in control, because sellers have sold. They've showed up in force in these areas. So green path is flipping the most recent distribution box over here, and that puts the momentum more so in the bulls' favor rather than sellers, which it is right now. So that's the logic behind the ETH analysis. That's what I'm looking at there. In other markets, quick look at stocks. So stocks continue higher. 50-day EMAs holding as support. So you've really just got to expect that to continue. I mean, stocks are strong. You just got to call it for what it is. They have strength. They are uptrending. They're still uptrending, even though crypto is not only not sideways, it's now going down. So yeah, continue to produce new highs if this band holds. And if you eventually get a close below this band, well, that's when you can say, okay, maybe we are going into some sideways or topping formation here. But until you close below that 50-day EMA, which it hasn't done in a very long time now. So the last time it closed below the 50-day EMA was February 25 on that tariff crash. And since then, it's just held it. So this is an uptrend. Simple. Expect it to continue higher. And it's very interesting that it's so much stronger than Bitcoin and crypto. Of course, it's got all the AI hype, all of those narratives. It's got the quantum hype, a lot of money flowing into the stock market right now. So yeah, something to keep an eye on. When does this actually stop trending? For now, it's respecting that 50-day EMA purple line. And gold's having its move up. So following this green path that I mentioned some time ago, didn't break down from this box. So yeah, gold pretty decent as well. Moving up, trending. It really needs to break above this level here now. This is your key level. So take these bands off on gold. It's in a box here where get above this level and you have some gaps over here which it can potentially start filling. But that can also act as resistance. So what I'll be looking at is, does this reject and we go lower, or do we actually start to fill the gap in? And that's what I'd look at on gold. Overall, double topped over here. So it's in mean reversion and consolidation within this range, within this box from 3.9 to 4.4K over here. And these are the points where it's most likely to reject from. And if it doesn't reject, then you're most likely to actually fill in this gap over here, this inefficient price action. So be watching that high over here at 4.2K roughly to see if we reject or flip that level. So that's the market, guys. That's the full update. Hope you guys enjoyed. Drop a like, drop a comment. I'll see you guys in the next one. GM.